We just check that you can hear us.
Yeah, can you hear me?
And someone in.
Cool. Well, getting us a thumbs up. Great, thank you so much. And you perfectly on time. Well, we were a bit behind, but I think we can eat a little bit into lunch because most of you are online. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just take like 10 to 20 minutes to just let people bring us some questions or open up the floor. I think we won't offer any immediate reflections today. Katerina is going to give a nice, wonderful overview at the end of today. She's taking brilliant notes. And I'd like to just open it up. If there's any questions from the physical audience or the digital audience, or if any of the speakers want to ask each other a question or reflect on what they made. I've been taking notes in the Miro board, so you can also reflect back on the post-its and the links that I've shared from each of the speakers. So let's open it up and we'll go for about 10, maybe 20 minutes, depending on how many questions there are.
Not quite a question, but I just want to say I'm so grateful for everyone for being here, for giving us this chance to kind of reflect with you. We've been incredibly lucky on the way to have such lovely readings with so many lovely guest speakers and people coming along to the sessions and making us think. And for me, it's just one of the kind of highlights of being a PhD student. So thank you so much for giving us the chance to do this with you.
Great, so yeah, you can raise the hand function. In the real world, people in this room, you guys have any reflections or thoughts or comments? Oh, brilliant. Using a real human hand, that's so strange.
I can't see anything here. I have a question for the second speaker. Is he still here? Has he gone to the meeting?
No, he's in a taxi. He's joining us en route.
I'm here, Joella.
Yeah, I thought I was really interested in your operationalizing your work and this idea about enshrining into law. So would this just be for that state, or is this across India? How does it work in terms of enshrinement into law?
Yeah, just for that state at this moment, and you know, there's reasons. It's tricky because the thing about practice is that even when you really want to do things, it's not like the world is inviting you to do them. Certainly not many forms of the state, and I would say the Indian state right now is not exactly the most amenable to certain forms of practice, if you say it like that. So I think that one of the things that also reflecting operationally helps you see is who is the audience for an idea, who is able to receive it at some point. And I think it's interesting. I think trying to operationalize things has both made me realize that sometimes you have to wait it out. You have to wait until an idea can be received. And just because you're convinced by it intellectually, empirically, anecdotally, doesn't mean that the world is going to receive it. So it's a very different kinds of humility and humbling and patience, because sometimes you're convinced that you've got such a good argument. How can it not work? That's not the way practice and politics works. And I think so this one, we moved at the state level because we found the state government receptive to the idea. And then the question is the other big precept we had of Southern thinking, right? Incrementalism. You make the move you can. You know, the best doesn't have to be the enemy of the good. You're not going to get all of the wins at once. That's what structural inequality is. You don't get to solve all the problems. So you make the move where you can get it. But I think the other thing that I've realized is partly the reason this move came about, because many people spend years socializing this idea into being believable. Seeded it, argued for it, researched it, did small studies, big studies, wrote op-eds, wrote academic papers, so that when we propose an idea, we say, look, there is a world of discourse behind it. There's evidence behind it. There's weight behind it. So I feel like some part of it is also about reading the moment, reading the pulse of a political moment, and finding out when you can make an operational move. But even if that moment's not there, you still have to do the work of seeding the idea. So you wait it out for that next window. And I think that that's where a lot of the analytical and academic training is very useful. How do you keep circling an argument, waiting? there's a lovely Audre Lorde poem that talks about having the courage to try out old ideas on a Sunday afternoon. And it's not, one doesn't have to discover these new bullets. One has to sort of keep saying the same thing, waiting in a way for the world to be ready to receive it, but also trying to make the world a bit more ready to receive it. So.
Thank you.
I can kind of see a link there with some of the things that you were describing on around archives and the importance of when the idea is operational, of actually having an archive there. It's,
Okay, keep going.
yeah. Of having an archive ready, of having the evidence, the kind of the lineage of an idea, having all the different connections to other ideas and to its context, having that basically that we can all engage with, and doing that as transparently as possible and as collectively as possible and with as much context as possible. So the other side of kind of it's a different type of analysis in a sense of kind of presenting information in a kind of archival way, or presenting information in a way that lets people, and maybe there's a connection here with Bea's work as well, of actually taking a skill set of being able to work from place and write yourself into architectural practice, and actually doing that in a way that can collectively be shared and built together.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think expanding on the archive, of course, the key ones one can think of are the East Africa material on Mau Mau, which for a long time, certain governments said did not exist. So you have to actually wait it out and find out, you need to both find the evidence that the archive exists and then wait to have access to that archive. So yes, I mean, it's that longue durée that you're having to actually wait to engage. And then indeed, when the information comes out, yes, being able to find the right time and the right place to be able to make that. So that's the long Sunday afternoon, sort of taking the Audre Lorde poem that it's a longer process. It's never instant, and often if one is in the south, that the challenge is even to find it and then actually be able to indeed use that to go further, and in the case of our colleague in India, to be able to even operationalize it, and that could take a lifetime, it could take a generation. But it's that, yes, I mean, I think it's that being able to engage with it, and certain times come in I guess world history where that becomes more of a possibility than it would have been in even 2-3 generations before. So yeah, I guess it's that carpe diem. You have to seize the moment, but realize that the moment might take much longer than the immediate. But yes, and then inscribing it into one's own history, which I think the last speaker was able to talk about much more, which is true as well. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing about archives, and saying, I think that in the practice world, the language to talk about archives is very impoverished, and it could really learn from the way in which Unwala was speaking, because if you think about what enables a kind of reference or comparison, whether it's across space or time, we get stuck with things like case studies and toolkits and best practices. And, archives to me are the thicker, more nuanced, more messy, more complete ways in which to tell stories about other places and other times that allow you to think about the present. And I wish actually that there was in some ways even contemporary archives of practice that didn't reduce themselves to the case study, or the toolkit in a way. And I know Catalina's work on storytelling does this. I think, when I was seeing Beatrice talking about the examples of teaching, I feel like teaching for me does the same thing. It creates archives of experiments, of narratives, of reflections, and so I think that if one thinks of archives as much of a verb as a noun, and I really loved the presentation, then I think it can become actually a really interesting practice that both the analytical and the operational need. And I think that we have a sense of thinking of archives. We've sort of conceded it to history, and we shouldn't. It's not a disciplinary I don't know the word in English. It's not a disciplinary property or whatever. Like, it's I think archive as an analytical method for urban thinking, and archiving as a very present method has such possibility in Southern thinking. I think it would be lovely because it holds placeness. I feel the same way as a lot of our thinking did.
Do you want to talk a bit about that? I think, oh, sorry, I see it's a question. Manas, would you like to answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of tag on to the idea of archives and thinking about practice in a very sort of governance bureaucracy sense. And I find that at the very least in the case of Delhi that I know somewhat, archive, there are sort of so many examples of cumulative kind of work on, let's say, I don't know, better sustainable drainage systems across the city, or people who have developed plans and quote unquote solutions for the Yamuna or greening or, pedestrian infrastructure or, reducing, road deaths. And these kinds of reports slash sort of things that keep circulating in quote unquote practice, again, become this massive archive. The question then becomes, where is it being archived? Because at the very least, not to say that journal articles or kind of, let's say, formal academic publication is the best way. But I know that in practice, this is a massive problem, because as long as there are people driving those archives, returning to that conversation 15 years later with a new minister and a new set of bureaucrats, if it's not dependent on that one firm or that one person, that archive is lost. The government is not in the habit of maintaining these archives, and is not in the habit of circulating them back when the time time comes, or the right time comes around. So it's the question of what is a public archive of, let's say, solutions, and how does one kind of go about doing that, if not through academic publishing?
I think it's a really great question, because one of the speakers wanted to engage with that. I think it's a really interesting publication of trying to action the archive, turn the archive into practice.
Well, I think the trajectory of archive is moving in that direction. The days of it being, dusty and behind closed doors is, I think, slowly being challenged. Because now, anyway, we talk about not just the physical, but the oral records. What I didn't say about the Leverhulme collection is that, or the Unilever collection, is that it's now being accompanied by interviews with workers who actually worked in the Unilever period from the early 20th century to its closure in the 21st century, the first decade of the 21st century. So therefore, it becomes more than just the written record. There's also the oral history record as well. And I guess maybe the word is now becoming the documentation, of which the physical archive is only part of that. So it is being used much more, but it's an imperfect situation. And again, the theoretical grounding is still much more Western, I would say, than Southern. But that is the challenge. I think the challenge is to make it a living, or certainly much more than this is the reference, it's in the case study box number X, file number that, and have it as something that is part of a working document, I would say. Well, I'm not sure. I think, yeah, the terminology is still to be further developed. But I think, yes, and I like the idea about the word, or the verb, the archive being more of a verb than just a word, and how we think about it. So that's an oblique response to the question. I don't think it's really an answer, but happy to share it with my other colleagues on the call just now.
And then Ben, just as we start to sort of wrap up before lunch, I think this idea of not just sort of questioning the archive, but I think what you guys were showing was also reinterrogating what are knowledge sets, so from Black Panther to feminist discourse to even getting students to think about their own archive, stories from their own home here in the UK. I really think this idea of, on the note I put for you on the board was, I see you working across centres, and I see that's what's happening with what you're talking about. I don't know if you want to add a bit about what, because you think you spoke about what you did, but maybe a little bit about what came out of those discussions and any sort of anecdotes about re-archiving the archive or working across these centres.
I think maybe one small thing that I was trying to point to towards the end with the students' work is what these discussions did to them, rediscovering also some of the context that they are from and that they work from, including, there was this one essay that I was mentioning of Rachel. I did a lot of work on folk tales from the English folk tales and the English tradition, and rediscovering how that was also a source of knowledge about the place that has been completely erased over history or someone else, like sort of drawing on stories of the Scottish Highlands, and the way that the students were through this journey in the Southern and feminist perspective, sort of looking back at their own places and places that they were familiar with, and sort of trying to unearth and archive like other stories from those places. For me, it's been very powerful, because what we were trying to work on within the module and what we're trying to do with them is to think this is not about, this is about re-understanding, as you said, the multiple centers and peripheries, and so also those smaller stories, or not smaller, but less discussed stories of disappropriation, but also of agency that they might find in their in their immediate context. And I think that literature and those type of resources have opened up spaces for us to discuss that with them, because then they would look back at places through this journey and come back also to looking at London with different eyes.
I think that's really powerful, and I think, and I'm going to take the last word before we go for lunch, but I think it was one of the first things that we had to redo almost every week in the session was, when we're talking about Southern urbanism, it's not necessarily this north-south dichotomy. There's this idea of centre and non-centre, and actually, this idea of London as a centre, England as a centre, and then across the UK. I think it's really relevant. I think what you're showing and what all the speakers are showing us today is that even within locations, there's other dynamics of centre and non-centre, other dynamics of knowledge base. It's not just the single narrative of a very powerful dichotomy between the colonial project and the rest of the world, or the West and the East. These boundaries are helpful starting points, but they're not the full story. And I think what we saw today and what we saw from all the speakers was ideas of trying to recenter and work across these centres. So thank you very much. Lou, do you want to say any last
also that none of us have kind of neat positions, on this side or that side of the kind of centre for every boundary. And especially when you start to practice, then I think some of the neat analytical categories start to really break down. Before we break for lunch, I actually don't want to keep us, but I have a half-baked idea about archiving as a kind of currency of something kind of current, but also an activity, also kind of a resource and infrastructure thing that has value, but is also kind of relational, tradable thing. So it's half-baked, and I'll try and work this up. It just came out as we were talking, so I'll try and work this one to the other. But just a heads up as to what's coming next. We're going to meet back here at 12:30. I'll just put up I'll just share the screen again. Sorry, 1:30. Everything is okay. So we meet back at 1:30. And when we come back, we're going to have a brief video from Soraya, and then we'll go jump straight into panel 2. And then we'll have Katrina reflecting with us and kind of another open discussion. So I think the second half of the day will have to be a bit more strict about timekeeping to get actually very nice to have a proper discussion.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Sorry,
you.
see you waiting.
And if you're wondering what to do, check the mirror thing out, but also if you want to just click on the maps to where you are, and you can get a sense of time plus and minus what 130 looks like. But it's basically have well 4 students.
Great, thank you so much, Bea and Ola as well. This is really, Catherine was just sort of waiting from the taxi so we get my sort of Haberdas way. And yeah, everyone, please take a break. This side will be enjoying some amazing snacks provided by Urban Lab. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you all in 14 minutes.